All right, so today we're going to really dig into some U.S. economics and
Mm.
politics. We've got a pretty interesting mix of stuff to look at today.
Yeah, it looks like someone sent in some Rumble videos.
Yeah, a YouTube interview with Treasury Secretary Bessent and even something from the National Desk.
Huh. Okay.
Seems like they're really trying to figure out what's going on with the current administration and their economic plans.
Especially everything with Ukraine.
Right, and like their whole stance on crypto.
Yeah, that's a big one these days. Definitely a lot to unpack there.
Okay, so let's start with that YouTube interview with Secretary Bessent. He really didn't hold back when talking about that meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky.
Yeah, you could tell there were some strong feelings there. Calling out Zelensky like that publicly, saying Zelensky was being disrespectful to the American people,
Yeah, that was a big statement.
really makes you think there's more to the story than just a policy disagreement. Like this could have some real consequences for the U.S. and Ukraine.
Oh, definitely. What about for future aid and cooperation?
Yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, it makes you wonder what Zelensky was even thinking.
Right, like what was he hoping to accomplish being so openly defiant?
Was he trying to, like, send a message to other world leaders or something?
Or was it a total miscalculation?
I mean, it's definitely a risky move. There's no doubt about that.
Makes you wonder about the trust between those two leaders.
For sure. Like, can they even negotiate effectively after something like this?
Well, speaking of negotiations, that whole proposed economic deal seems to be the center of this tension.
Right.
Bessent kept talking about how great this deal could be for Ukraine,
Right.
even compared it to Poland's economic growth.
Yeah, he brought up how their economies were at similar points after the fall of the Iron Curtain.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But look at them now. Poland's economy is 4 times bigger than Ukraine's.
Hmm.
So you got to wonder, what made the difference?
That's a huge difference.
I mean, was it like different resources or better trade agreements?
Maybe a more skilled workforce?
Or maybe it all comes down to a more stable political situation.
That's a good point. Ukraine's had a rough time, not just internally, but with international stuff too.
Yeah, no doubt all of that's got to affect their economy,
Right.
especially now with the whole Russia conflict.
Oh, yeah, that's not going away anytime soon.
This really makes you wonder if this deal could even stabilize things enough to actually work. Or is the conflict going to scare off any potential investors?
So Besant said the deal is equity-based. So, like, it's about shared ownership and profits, not just about the U.S. exploiting Ukraine.
Right.
He was really selling it as a win-win.
Okay, but think about how that message is being perceived.
Yeah, good point. Like, in Ukraine, do they see it that way? What about the rest of the world?
Some experts are already comparing it to the Treaty of Versailles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, saying that it punishes the victim.
So it sounds like this economic deal is kind of like walking a tightrope, just like the actual peace negotiation.
For sure.
So much at stake, like the consequences could be huge.
Yeah, this really highlights how tricky things can get with economic diplomacy.
All right, well, let's move on to something else the administration's focusing on, tariffs. Bessent talked about them as a way to make money to help reduce the U.S. deficit.
Yeah, especially the tariffs on Chinese goods.
Right. But I guess tariffs aren't just about generating revenue. They can be used to pressure other countries, right?
Absolutely. It's a way for the U.S. to push for trade practices that are in their best interest.
Yeah. So it's kind of like playing economic chess.
Exactly. And it gets even trickier because Bessent mentioned using reciprocal tariffs.
Oh, yeah, like matching the tariffs set by other countries.
Right. Or even dropping tariffs entirely, depending on how negotiations go.
Wow. So there are a lot of possibilities there.
It can get pretty complicated.
So we've talked about how the administration is using tariffs, but let's talk about the U.S. deficit. I mean, it just seems like a problem that never goes away.
Yeah, it's definitely something every administration has to deal with. It's interesting that Secretary Bessent talked about reprioritizing spending instead of just cutting everything.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It sounds like they're trying to be more strategic about it, like finding ways to be more efficient and maybe even eliminate some waste.
He also mentioned something about finding a lot of fraud within the government.
Oh, yeah, that's not something you hear every day.
Definitely caught my attention.
It makes you wonder what exactly he's talking about. Like, is it government contracts?
Or like social welfare programs.
Maybe tax evasion? And how much are we talking about here? If they can recover a significant amount of money, that could really make a difference with the deficit.
He even said they're thinking about creating a whole new department focused on government efficiency.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
They seem pretty serious about this.
It does make you think, though. Like,
Yeah.
can you really make a government more efficient?
I mean, it's not exactly what they're known for, right?
Mhm.
But if they can streamline things and cut out unnecessary stuff, it could save a lot of money.
It makes you wonder if that could be the answer to the deficit. Like, if they can just find a way to be more efficient, Maybe they don't have to do things like cut important programs or raise taxes.
Yeah, that would definitely be a better option for everyone.
Okay, so let's talk about something else. The incoming Treasury Secretary's take on cryptocurrency.
Yeah, some people are really excited about that.
It's definitely causing a stir.
I think it just shows how much cryptocurrency is becoming part of the global financial system. It's not going away.
Governments are definitely taking notice.
Yeah, they're trying to figure out how to regulate it and integrate it.
It's kind of like the Wild West out there right now, all these new coins popping up all the time,
It is exciting, but it can also be really confusing.
especially if you're not like a financial expert.
That's why it's so important to have leaders who understand this stuff. The incoming secretary has a background in finance, so hopefully that means we'll see some smart regulations.
Yeah, something that's good for investors and good for the economy as a whole.
Right.
This also makes me think about the future of international trade and finance. Like, could we see a shift away from the US dollar? Could crypto change everything?
Those are great questions. I mean, crypto has the potential to be really disruptive.
Hmm.
It's hard to say for sure what will happen, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Okay, so let's go back to the situation in Ukraine. Bessent was pretty adamant that this economic deal would really help them. He even brought up Poland as an example of how things could go.
Yeah, he emphasized how different their paths have been since the fall of the Iron Curtain.
Hmm.
Both economies were at a similar place back then,
Right.
but now Poland's economy is 4 times bigger.
That's wild.
He really credits those pro-growth free market policies that Poland adopted.
It makes you think about what really matters for economic growth, right? Is
Yeah.
it access to resources or having good trade deals?
Maybe it's having a skilled workforce or a stable political system.
Or maybe it's all of those things.
Probably a mix. But it's clear that Ukraine has faced some big challenges. Corruption and political instability have definitely played a role.
And now with the war with Russia, it's even harder to know what the future holds. I mean, will this deal be enough to stabilize things? Can they attract foreign investment with everything going on?
It's tough to say.
Bessent really believes that this deal is a lifeline for Ukraine.
Yeah, he kept saying it's their chance to build a better future. But with the conflict still going on, it's a huge challenge.
He really emphasized that this deal is equity-based, like over and over again.
Yeah, he wanted to make it clear that this isn't about the U.S. taking advantage of Ukraine.
Right, like it's a true partnership.
But some experts are skeptical. They think it might not be as beneficial to Ukraine as it seems.
We have to remember those concerns too. Like, what if this deal ends up hurting relations in the long run?
What if it makes people distrust the U.S.?
It's a tough situation. The U.S. wants to help, but they also have their own interest to consider.
It's a classic example of how complex international relations can be.
Okay, so let's look at this piece from the National Desk. It's all about the incoming Treasury Secretary.
Okay.
Their background is pretty interesting. Hedge fund manager, connections to both Donald Trump and George Soros.
Huh? That's quite a combination.
I know, right? It makes you wonder what they'll do in this role.
It's definitely not the typical path to Treasury Secretary. They're coming from outside the political world.
Yeah, that could be a good thing. Maybe they'll bring a fresh perspective.
Or maybe it'll create some conflicts of interest.
True.
We'll have to wait and see how their past experiences influence their decisions.
One thing that caught my eye is their idea to get rid of taxes on tips.
Oh, yeah.
That could be a big deal for people in the service industry.
Absolutely. A lot of those workers rely on tips.
I imagine some people will be thrilled about this, but others probably not so much.
Yeah, the supporters will say it's a good thing for workers and the economy.
But the critics will probably say it'll hurt the government's budget.
Right. They'll worry about losing that tax revenue. What will that mean for government programs and services?
It makes you think about the bigger picture. Like, is this just about helping service workers? Or is it part of a bigger plan to cut taxes for everyone?
It's a good question. We'll have to see how it all plays out and what it means for the new administration's economic strategy.
So we have the current Treasury Secretary dealing with the deficit and this Ukraine situation.
And then you have the incoming secretary with this whole crypto thing,
It's going to be interesting to see what happens next.
especially with the possibility of a recession and inflation still being a problem.
There's a lot to worry about.
It really makes you think, how are these two different approaches going to work together? What does it mean for the U.S. economy in the long run?
We've gone over a lot in this deep dive.
Yeah, from diplomacy to economic policy.
Even touched on cryptocurrency.
Definitely a lot of interconnected issues.
Before we finish up, I want to go back to that YouTube interview with Secretary Bessent for a second. He seemed really worried about how Zelensky's actions could affect the American people. He even used the word disrespect a few times.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, it wasn't just a passing comment. He really emphasized that.
Right, and using that word disrespect, it feels like it could have some serious consequences.
You think so?
Yeah, like it could really damage public support for Ukraine.
Oh, I see what you mean. If Americans start thinking Zelensky is ungrateful, they might not want to help anymore.
Exactly. Public opinion matters a lot when it comes to foreign policy, especially when you're talking about giving aid and support to another country.
So you're saying if people don't like Zelensky, it'll be harder for the administration to justify sending help to Ukraine.
Right, and think about the people who are already against U.S. involvement in the conflict. They could really use this to their advantage.
Yeah, that's true. They could say, see, we told you they didn't appreciate our help.
This whole situation really highlights how difficult it is for the administration. They're trying to balance domestic politics with what's happening internationally.
It's a tough spot to be in.
Okay, let's switch back to the U.S. economy. Bessent kept talking about the need to reprioritize spending to deal with the deficit. But I'm curious, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. What are they going to prioritize? What does it mean for everything else?
He mentioned improving government efficiency and cracking down on fraud as ways to save money.
Yeah, but he wasn't very specific.
But he did say they're considering a whole new department dedicated to government efficiency.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so they seem pretty serious about this whole efficiency thing.
That's kind of surprising, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, governments aren't exactly known for being super efficient.
Well, true.
But if they can find ways to reduce waste and streamline things,
Yeah.
that could free up a lot of money.
It makes you wonder if this focus on efficiency could be the answer to the deficit problem. Like, what if they can get things running smoothly?
Yeah.
Maybe they won't have to make those big cuts to programs. Or raise taxes for everyone.
That would definitely be a win.
But will it be enough? Like, is it really possible to make the government that much more efficient?
I guess we'll have to wait and see. It's a good idea in theory.
Oh, and remember that comment about uncovering a lot of fraud? That really made me curious.
Yeah, what was that all about?
What kind of fraud are we talking about? Government contracts, social welfare programs, tax evasion.
And how much money are they talking about recovering?
These are all questions we need answers to. It seems like the administration is getting more serious about finding and stopping fraud.
Yeah, which is good. Could save a lot of money.
Yeah.
But it also makes you think about accountability and transparency.
Oh, right. Like, will this lead to more scrutiny of how the government spends money?
Will it make them more careful about how they use taxpayer dollars?
Hopefully it will, because if they can show they're taking this seriously, it could help people trust the government more.
That would be a positive outcome, for sure.
Okay, so one last thing before we wrap up. The incoming Treasury Secretary and their stance on cryptocurrency. It's definitely a hot topic.
Yeah.
Some people are calling it a revolutionary technology. Others are worried about the risks.
It shows how much the financial world is changing. And governments are having to catch up. Cryptocurrency isn't some fringe thing anymore.
It's here to stay.
And its impact on the global economy is only going to get bigger.
And the fact that the incoming secretary comes from the world of hedge funds is interesting, too.
Right. That's not your typical background for a Treasury Secretary.
Will their experience lead to better regulation? Or will they be more hands-off?
It's hard to know for sure, but their history suggests they'll be pretty market-focused.
Probably looking for ways to make things more efficient and competitive.
Yeah, that seems to be the trend.
It'll be really interesting to see how they approach regulating cryptocurrency. It's a tricky balance.
Yeah, how do you protect consumers and encourage innovation at the same time? That's the challenge.
And their decisions will affect more than just the U.S. They'll have an impact on the whole global financial system.
No pressure, right?
Well, I think that's about all the time we have for today. We covered a lot.
We did, from international relations to the future of finance.
It's clear that there are a lot of challenges ahead for the U.S. economy.
And for its role in the world.
The decisions made in the next few years are going to be crucial.
They'll have a huge impact on everyone.
I hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about.
Yeah, keep learning and keep talking about these issues. They're important.
The future is shaped by the choices we make today. So stay curious, stay engaged, and stay informed.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another exploration of the ideas and issues that matter most.